So, how do we solve that problem? And I spent a lot of my time with the Commissioner this morning talking about this issue. It's up to us to find a solution. That's the first thing. All right, to find a solution that he can sell to other countries to ensure that Ireland isn't getting some kind of special treatment and in a way that will skew the marketplace. So that's not easy. But we are working on doing that. We have a number of models. Some of you may have read about them in the journal and other agri-media. And we are looking at ways in which we will change the system. Because anybody who expects that the status quo will just be rolled over is not being realistic either. The idea that in 2019 you would have a single farm payment based on your productivity in 2002, which is where your current payment is based on, is not a saleable proposition. All right? So there is going to be some redistribution of single farm payment. But we cannot have a situation where productive farmers are losing 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% of their payment, and when other farmers who may not need it are getting an increase of 70 or 80 or 90% in their single farm payment. That makes no sense. So we need to try and dramatically change the redistribution proposal and tailor that for Ireland and put a mechanism in place that can work and can be implemented. So perhaps some farmers may lose 10 or 15% of their payment, but certainly not 40. And other farmers may gain 20 or 25% on their payment, but certainly not 70%. So that we don't have this dramatic shift in supports and resources away from the productive sector in Ireland, which will do huge damage to the agri-food sector generally in terms of its capacity to grow and expand and so on. So I am acutely aware of this situation. We will have people in our department working full-time on trying to find an answer to how we can get around it. And I'm confident, I'm hopeful, and I hope becoming confident that we can do that. But it's not going to be easy, and we'll need to work with your organisation and others to try and find ways of doing that. In terms of greening, I think our concerns are more straightforward there. In my view, I would rather not have two payments. The idea that farmers would get 70% of their payment and then they'd have to jump over a certain number of environmental hurdles to get the remaining 30% essentially involves a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of enforcement, a lot of inspection, and a whole new payment system that actually will have to be put in place for that 30% greening payment. The other problem with the 30% greening payment is that 30% greening payment is being proposed on an area-based flat rate payment model, which again is a problem for Ireland. So what I would rather see is that we would make appropriate changes potentially to cross-compliance, whereby everybody would have to farm in a sustainable way, but that it would be easy to understand and that people would simply get their full payments if they farm in a sustainable, sensible way. Having said that, I'm not sure that it's going to be possible to get that result. I think from my, as a guesstimate, as a politician, I suspect that we will have to keep some element of a separate payment. So we need to make sure that it's as easy and as simple for farmers as possible to actually farm in a way that allows them to get that extra payment without too much difficulty. And in a way that makes sense for the environment. There's no point in putting you through a whole set of processes on your farm if there's no net benefit for the environment at the end of the day. It'll just irritate everybody, involve more cost, more bureaucracy, and it'll be ridiculed from an environmental point of view as well, which makes no sense. On the reference year issue, I've made your views very clear to the Commissioner. My preference is to have a reference year that's based in the past rather than in the future, so that it doesn't impact on behaviour between now and whenever a reference year is set. The reason, and I'm sure the Commissioner outlined this to you, the reason why they put a 2011 tieback mechanism in place was purely to try and solve an Irish problem, but it doesn't fully solve it, and so we will continue to negotiate with the Commission on this issue. But again, I think the big issue for us is about redistribution within the member states, i.e. Ireland, and I think also we have some issues around greening. There are other issues as well which you may want to question me on, and we can talk about them in a few minutes' time. So can I finish by saying, because I know you want to get on with questions, can I finish by saying I'm very optimistic about our industry. I think that we cannot expect commodity prices to continue to increase as they have over the last 2 years. That is just unrealistic. We may see a slight weakening in price every now and again, but I think the trend in food prices over the next 10 years will be one that is moving upwards in the right direction, a bit like the trend in oil prices. Every now and again it goes up and drops, but the trend is that it's moving in the right direction. And that's good news for all of you. We have extraordinary demand worldwide that is growing with every week that passes for the kind of food that you produce and the kind of food that large food companies can add value to and export and exploit the value of in a very exciting way in the coming years. And that will take a partnership between farmers, processors, food companies, large and small, my department and all of its agencies, farming organisations, in particular yours, because you're the biggest by far, to try and make that happen. It involves upskilling for farmers, looking at new ways of doing things to exploit potential. I often say to farmers when I'm talking to them, there's so much focus amongst the farming community on the price that you get for your produce, when actually, in real terms, you have no control over that price at all, in most instances. The price of beef and the price of milk is predominantly set by world prices now, or at least EU prices. So we have very little control over the commodity price of the products that we're producing. What we do control is how we produce those commodities, and the cost of producing them, and the way in which we produce them, and the business models we put in place to get the best return on what we produce in terms of margin and in terms of profit. And that is what I'm going to try and focus on for the next 12 months in particular. Trying to give ways and ideas to farmers that they can implement in a practical way that can allow them to make more money. So that we control in a much more intelligent way what we do control, rather than spending so much time talking about prices, which are hugely important. And there are issues around price, particularly in the relationship with multiples, and we are going to follow through, President, on our promise in relation to a mandatory code of conduct between retailers, i.e. supermarkets, and food producers. But that's not going to solve all of our problems in relation to the margins and the percentage of the end price that farmers get. I mean, it's a fairly sobering thought that 10 years ago, across the European Union, farmers got 30% of the end price of the product when it was sold in the shop. Now they get 19%. So that has steadily reduced year on year. So this is a European problem that requires a European solution. The idea that in Ireland we would somehow put a price floor in place, in other words, fix prices, to guarantee that farmers get a better price. That may work domestically here in Ireland, but it would mean that all of the food that we export may well be damaged, because we wouldn't be able to find a home for it at that price. So the reality for Ireland is that because we're an exporting economy of food, we have to be the most efficient, in price terms as well as in other terms, producer of food in the European Union, if we're to continue to stay ahead of our competitors. And so if we're to get a higher percentage of the end price for our food producers, that is something that primarily we need to realise at a European level. And of course, if there's abuse going on between large multiples and small producers, in terms of contracts, in terms of hello money, in terms of unfair charging for shelf space, and all sorts of other things, well then we need to deal with that through a mandatory code, and we're going to try and do that. But on the whole, this is a sector that's on the up. We've just had 2 great years. We can have another 10 great years in a row if we manage this properly. And if we work together to realise that potential. There will be dips, there will be problems, and the challenge for us all is how we deal with them and move on to actually exploit the extraordinary potential for growth that is actually there. So I look forward to working with the IFA, with your leadership in particular, who I have great respect for, and a little bit of fear of every now and again. And I look forward to, I hope, continuing to provide the kind of good news story to the general economy, people outside of the agri-food sector, who look on in amazement and say, how is this happening in the midst of recession? A 25% growth in agri-food exports. I look forward to continuing to move on this positive, optimistic journey for the agri-food sector, which I hope will inspire other sectors to be reminded that actually there are some things that Ireland does really, really well. And we should be proud of that and build on that. And one of the things that we do really, really well is produce safe, top quality, sustainable food. And we need to continue to do that and get a better price for what we do. So thanks very much for having me.